Welcome to week 5. I hope you're doing well. Hope that you're having a great week and weekend. It was great getting to read your snippets about your mock counseling sessions. I was thoroughly impressed to get to hear how you ladies and gentlemen did. Sounds to me like I could have used every one of y'all to be in my very first counseling session, and would have been extremely helpful to have y'all there. So sounds like y'all knocked it out of the park. Sounds to me like y'all learned something. And as a result of that, that is the point of utilizing those type of things into our education systems. So the mock counseling session 1 should be finished. You should have turned that in today. And now this week, as we look at mock counseling session 2, and you turn that in next Sunday, and then of course you finish up the third one the following week. So the only difference between the first one and the second and third one is the stipulations are going to be the same, but I'd encourage and challenge you to look at a different theoretical framework than you did in the first one. And I know that some of the first ones, the earlier theories that we've looked at, may not fit you like you had hoped, but stay with it, and hopefully one of these that we are looking at now or in the future will fit you a lot more closely. I know that a lot of individuals do like CBT, which is a formation of behavioral therapy. So either that or REBT, which is rational emotive behavioral therapy. So hopefully one of those two. So therefore, you'll be able to utilize those with your third counseling session. This week, we've got week 5. Again, you got a discussion board, and I always like to bring in perspectives of Scripture and allow you to think through what that would look like if that individual actually came through your door and you were to counsel them and or minister to them. So I'm looking forward to your Blackboard discussions and get to see how you'd utilize either behavior and or reality therapy as you help the individual in question within the Blackboard. So we're looking at reality therapy. I actually utilized a YouTube post from a psychologist, and he unpacked behavioral therapy theory really, really well. And so I thought, instead of y'all just always having to hear from me or getting to hear from me, we would try somebody else to lay that foundation so that you could get a little bit different exposure from somebody else. So I'm going to let him lay that foundation of behavioral therapy. I'm going to talk about reality therapy, and we are going to journey forward as we look at week 5. So reality therapy is a client-centered form of cognitive behavioral therapy. And what's really, really interesting, I was talking with a clinician on Friday, and we were talking about things like mindfulness and things that really have come within the last 10, 15 years, maybe not even quite that long. And he stopped me. He said, "Brady, you know what's interesting about mindfulness and some of these other things?" Now, again, I am an advocate of mindfulness depending upon the source and the foundation. Can you take it in kind of the left field perspective? Absolutely. But again, can you create mindfulness within the foundation of who God is? I personally believe so. But again, this is not about me indoctrinating you. You get to determine whether or not you feel like mindfulness is something that you feel like is of God, and you want to utilize that as a theoretical perspective within your practice, your ministry. But he stopped me. He said, "Brady, mindfulness, really, if you want to get technical, it is, we knew it back in the day as, cognitive behavioral therapy." And so a lot of these dynamics of what we are knowing now to have different stipulations really kind of stemmed from cognitive behavioral. So hopefully as we look forward to that next week, y'all will be excited. But not only that, as we look at reality therapy, we actually see that there is some formation that actually takes place from CBT within the constructs of reality. It focuses on improving present relationships and circumstances, and has less concern with the discussions of the past events. The here and now, as we looked at Gestalt last week, and the whole idea of the present, the here and now. He looked at the idea of understanding how we got to the present moment by understanding the context of the individual. Reality therapy, really, they want to put all the emphasis and attention on the present, on the present, on the present, on the present. Reality therapy sees behavior as choice, and teaches us that while we cannot control how we feel, we can control how we think and behave. We choose to behave in certain ways, and these choices can help or hamper the ability to satisfy these needs and reach individual goals. The therapy also includes choice theory and the behaviors that we choose are key to our accountability and who we are. So the dynamic of, we can see kind of some comparison and contrastion between Gestalt and reality. The therapy is less concerned with actual mental health diagnosis. This is where a little bit of controversy actually falls within this perspective, because the idea of how a lot of other perspectives and theories and psychotherapists and psychologists and psychiatrists would actually push back and say, you know what? We believe that there are other complexities, whereas reality really gives the illusion, if not comes out and says, we believe that health diagnosis actually stem from the parameter of choice, the choosing of the behavior. The goal of this type of therapy is to help people take control of improving their own lives by learning to make better choices. Now, what we see is the idea of how this is a very empowering type of theoretical approach. The dynamic of, okay, if they can't control how they feel, but they can control what they think, and they can control how they behave, okay? So what is behavior? And really, we have to look at it from that standpoint. Behavior, from my perspective, is the expression of what's in us. So if we get squeezed, what's in us permeates through us. And you hear this within leadership books, and the dynamic of, you really want to know what's in an individual. Wait till they are backed into a corner where they don't have the opportunity of thinking through things logically, but just what's in them comes out of them. And the dynamic of that is same with us. This is why you hear me talk so much about the impact of repression, because if we're repressing things in us, then those very dynamics, can they be repressed, or can they be expressed externally? And as a result of that, thus the way we'd see behavior. And again, you get to determine that. I would say yes. Early on in my professional career, I did a lot of work with children. Children that could articulate, but their minds and their brains are completely at a different place than for those of us that are adults. And so in that, the idea of their behavior is really to communicate what was going on inside of them, because again, they didn't have the vernacular to be able to communicate that. So a lot of times the tantrums or whatever it is was to communicate with mom, dad, caregiver, hey, something is going on internally. And when we talk with mom and dad, for those of y'all that are in working with children or want to work with children, or are working with children, the idea of when they express themselves in a certain way, what I'd always help them see is the idea of what if I understand the need of wanting to look at the behavior, because we all typically that's what gets our attention. But what if they're trying to communicate something to you, and as a result of that, if they are feeling pain internally and they don't know how it's to communicate it other than just this tantrum, and as a result of that, we as the caregiver sees the tantrum and we go address the tantrum, then what could that communicate to them internally? We think that we're doing something of positive and correction and direction, and that may be the key. Again, you get to determine that. But my concern was the idea that if they're sitting there thinking, I feel this way, so I'm trying to communicate it, so therefore I can get the attention that I need and hopefully get this resolved, but now I'm being corrected and getting in trouble for the very thing that I'm communicating, then the idea is that that child could communicate this to themselves internally. It's not okay for me to be me. It's not okay to be heard. It's not okay for me to have expression. It's not okay for me to fill in the blank. And as a result of that, when I'd work with children and working with parents and working with the culture of the environment, these are the dynamics that I wanted to work with. And a lot of that was actually taken from reality therapy, the idea of what if the idea of their behavior was based upon their choice of communicating but not knowing exactly what that is. How much of the time do people actually do something from a place of being unaware? We've talked about this in those early couple of weeks of this class, of how 95%, according to medical research, behavior stems from the subconscious, this place of unaware. And knowing how God is the God of awareness, and he's constantly bringing us into awareness. Why? So that we can engage our willingness to process that. So is that based on choice? Yes. But is that based on conscious awareness of the choices that have been made. Well, Brady, how can you not be aware? Because the dynamic of what about people that are in grief? What about people that are in shock and all these different complexities that they're going through? And because of that, the very thing and the data that came to them is now operational through them that they're not aware of. And because of that, they're just feeling in pain and they're responding out of pain to try to mask or minimize that pain. Is that behavior? Yes. Is that based on choice? Well, you get to determine that. But are they aware of the very thing that's driving that? Or do they just acknowledge this idea of pain, pleasure, sensation? And again, you'll learn more about that. And if you don't within whatever class you take, research it. Why? Because this is a premise that I operate on not extensively, but in a lot of the ways. So when I walk an individual through, I want to talk with them about the complexities of invisible to physical. Theology, depending on if they're a believer, if they're not, we lean on quantum physics, the idea of the invisible giving shape to the physical. What I think, what I feel, what I tell myself, what I want, what I desire, right? And so in this, one of the dynamics is that we'll get here in a little bit is this acronym that's a part of this, and it is, I don't remember the off the top of my head, the WDEP system. And really that W stands for wants. This is something that I utilize a lot. So Brady, where would you fall? Do you use this? Yes. Exclusively? No. I don't use any one of these theories exclusively. It's almost like the hodgepodge. If you would take all these theories, dump them out, mix them together, and pick out the things that you didn't think were of a foundation of Scripture, then as a result of that, you'd probably get something similar to the way you'd see me express what I express. And that's what's great for us to get to teach this time and time again, because there's times where we may not lean on some of these theoretical frameworks or think that we lean into them to the extent that as we start studying them to present the material to students, we're like, well, hey, look at that. I actually utilize this more than I actually thought I did. So the idea of goals can help or hamper the ability to satisfy essential needs and reach an individual's goals. The idea of utilizing goals are vital. The need of defense, the need of comfort, the need of protection. Now, again, he goes into a different dynamic, and we'll talk about those like freedom and choice, and freedom or independence, which deals with the ability to choose. He talks about achievement and power and love and belonging and survival. Again, this kind of stems from Maslow, hierarchy of needs for those of y'all that have already taken intro to psychology, but the dynamic of understanding Genesis 3, mankind need of connecting to the source of mankind's needs. As a result of that, does that change? No. And really when it says that mankind became got what it is that they were after in that very moment, the idea of how they knew changed. How they knew changed. The idea of the what am I wanting to say? The knowledge of good and evil was determined by what or whom. And of course we understand the cross, but the dynamic of that is, does the opportunity of the residue still stand? And that's why I always like to find out what is taking place and how do we reverse engineer it back to the place of understanding the very needs that mankind has that they're attempting to try to get accomplished. So do I use reality therapy? Yes. In this formation, the way that he has established it? No. Because I look at that dynamic of needs as love and belonging. Great. Yeah, I probably talk a little bit more about love and acceptance because I feel like acceptance is crucial. Okay. Talk about power. I feel like yes. And by giving the energy attached with, now again, I hope y'all understand when I mean energy. I don't mean like the new age dynamics, but the idea of how everything equates to energy, right? You know, what we feel, energy, what we think, energy, what we eat, energy. Okay. So the dynamic of that is when we experience something, our limbic system and or our emotional brain is the first filter, and the dynamic of what our mind does or doesn't do, it can get repressed. The dynamic of giving that a voice, whatever that energy is, a voice. I feel anxious. I feel tired. I feel hopeless. Whatever that is, giving it a voice allows us to be powerful. Why? Because we feel very powerless when we feel like our voice is taken from us. So the dynamic of helping people acknowledge, this is the reason why I believe confession is so powerful, and we understand as believers why we're asked to do it. I actually believe that there's not only that parameter, but there's also a physiological blessing. Why? It allows the mind to validate the body. Why? So that there actually power can take place. Now we see within page 184 that it can be referenced in kind of a negative orientation, but it was actually later described in more positive alternatives such as achievement or accomplishments. There we go, or internal control. So the dynamic of understanding needs are vital. What is the need that they're after? Because the need that goes without doesn't just go away. Doesn't go away. So how is it that they're choosing to get that need met? Or has apathy, the feeling of what's the point, come into them where they've agreed with it now as a result of that they're choosing this. So choice is impactful, because as what a man believes, thus mankind believes in their heart, so are they. So can it be about choice? Because understanding God's central message, which is metanoia and or change the way you think, the idea of, we can see how reality therapy really does have a lot of foundations in how we express and how we can assimilate it in with different theories. I know I'm jumping around a lot, so hopefully I know that you're going to be able to track with me, okay? So he looked at the idea of basic human needs. He believed that all human behavior is basically motivated or governed by 5 basic human needs. And of course are genetically encoded in every individual, of course, according to Tan. Okay, survival, okay, that dynamic of having food, having a roof over your head, those type of things. Love and belonging, okay. Makes sense. The idea and the most important and primary of all the needs, according to his perspective. Power, again, was seen out as negative, but the idea of how they've been able to give a little bit more positive polish on that. Freedom and independence, the ability to choose. And this is what I like a lot about this, is the opportunity of putting it back on the individual, because a lot of times people will come into counseling saying this is what's going on, and it's going to be it's terrible what they're going through. It's painful what they're going through. And as a result of that, they're going to want to give that to you. They're going to want you to take it from them. And you've heard my parameters. Now, again, if you've been around with, for me, at any point in time in different classes, or if this is your first time, please hear me. I'm not here to indoctrinate you. This isn't about me trying to create in you how to do it my way, because my way is hopefully pointing to God. Really, that's what my hope is. But for you to discover who you are, what you're doing here, and how do you express that in a way so that you're doing something very similar to point. As a counselor, you're pointing to the counselor, because the counselor is where change actually happens. But the idea of them saying here, and you're like, yeah, no, that's difficult. There's that validation part. So what are you going to do? And as I've trained counselors over the past 17 years, like I've talked with y'all about, I think it was the first lecture, about how a lot of times they'll want to reach over there and grab them. Of course, they're not physically, and I'll slap their hands, again, not physically. Why? Because I understand that if they don't own it, they can't take the choice of actually taking the next step. And a lot of times the very things of where they feel powerless inhibits the opportunity of them moving forward. And we have the opportunity of actually creating additional powerlessness, there we go, if we're not careful of how we see this. They need to choose. But are they in a position? Are they in shock? If they're in shock, is that the proper time to try to get them to choose different things? Why? Because the right brain's hyperactive, the left brain's hyperdormant, and right then, as a result of that, the thing that they're needing is just presence, you being present, and the idea of, hey, what is it that they need from his first standpoint, survival. And through that, we actually show them love and belonging. It's a very, chaplain approach, okay? So the dynamic of what we see is survival, love and belonging, power, freedom and independence, which is choice. And the final need for fun. Wow, think about that dynamic. Did you see that one coming? I know that back in the day I didn't. But the idea of one of the things in the tools that he talks about is actually the parameter of utilizing humor. Humor. The therapist and client laughing together at a joke at themselves or others in a sensitive and appropriate way. Now, we have to be careful that you're not dealing with someone who's utilizing this to deflect. Can that happen? Absolutely. Seen it many, many times. And so utilizing this, we can actually jump to that pool with them, and we're actually impacting them. Why? Because we're allowing them to deflect and take the attention away from the very things that they need to keep their attention on. But the idea of having fun. I remember being around children's ministry, and one of the theories, I remember a guy by the name of Ken Jackson, Pastor Ken Jackson, who was one of the first children's pastor there at Gateway Church. His philosophy was always have fun, learn about God. And I remember thinking that's really, really interesting. Shouldn't it be learn about God and have fun? And his premise back then, again, I'd have to have another conversation with him. It's been a while, but he really felt like in order to teach kids about God, the foundation of fun must be there, which I think is crucial. So if you're going to do things with children, from a therapy standpoint, fun needs to be something. Why? Because if not, trying to engage them for 45 to 50 minutes, their attention is, when do I get out of here? So think about the idea of having fun. And what does that look like? Therapy can be seen as extremely serious, and you know what? It needs to be, but can it be fun? And what does that look like? Well, Brady, you're telling me that it needs to be serious, but you're telling me to have fun. What does that look like? Yes. And just like I can remember, one of the posts in the Blackboard discussion said this, something to the effect of, I believe the more that I do that, the more I'll get comfortable about this very dynamic. And the answer was yes. To get comfortable in the uncomfortable. Well, Brady, what does that mean? Yes. The idea that there are going to be times in sessions that we feel extremely uncomfortable because we don't know what to do. It's okay not to know what to do. The idea of sitting back and allowing God to drive is, in essence, everything. If we feel overly comfortable all the time, every session, then does that kind of give a metrics that maybe something's going on within us, dealing with maybe pride? I don't know. You get to determine that. Okay. So, let's see. Choice theory emphasizes the key characteristics of all human behavior. Human beings, from birth to death, is the fact that they behave. It's described in choice theory. We talked a little bit about the idea of feelings, no, but thought and behavior, which is really, really interesting. The idea of how do you change the way you think? Well, really, is that not the message of Jesus? To repent, to change the way you're thinking and or seeing something. And I really love walking people through, in essence, of what I see Jesus in the garden. I see him becoming aware of his pain, right? The blood trickling down his face. He declares out of that pain, Father, if there's a way that this cross the cup could pass before me, please do so. Aware, declare, invite. There's that invitation through that time, inviting God into the conversation. Aware, declare, and through that we see God being invited into the equation through his declaration. Then from that, aware, declare, invite, express, he got up and he started walking. Of course, he had a conversation with John, James, and Peter. Then as a result of that, had 2 additional times. But the idea of aware, declare, invite, express. One of the things that I always like to have people do, then imagine. Imagine what it would be like. And this is very reality therapy perspective. Think about what this would look like if this was different. Or imagine yourself, what is that affirmational thing? I can. I like utilizing the little engine that could. Well, Brady, yes, with kids, even with adults. Why? Because again, this is how I add humor. Hey, I've got this great theological, scientific book that I think is going to be phenomenal. A lot of times I'll have people be like, oh, really, Brady? Tell me the name of this book. Ready? And I'll be like, okay, you got your pen, you got your paper, okay, ready? They may have it. It's something that's really, really extensive, scientific. You're going to love it. Okay, great. Give it to me. The little engine that could. I beg your pardon? The kids book. Yeah. And then we start unpacking it, and the idea of thinking differently. I think I can. And what we see is this parameter, and the dynamic is mind. Where the mind goes, the body follows. Very quantum, right? But we also see this theologically as well, and how our thoughts can actually be changed. Hey, are you aware that you're thinking this way? Yes, I am. Okay, so what can you do about that? Well, I can't find. Well, when you find yourself thinking about that, the more that you become aware of that, the more can you be, as you become aware of that, can you declare right now, I think. Invite God into that thought. Whoa, express that thought. God, I give you that thought. Don't push it down. Get it out. Get it out. I think I can. We've had there's this perspective. I remember doing a session just this past Thursday, and I had this young lady, and we were talking about the idea of positivity. We were talking about the dynamic of affirmations. Utilizing God's truth, pushing it in the container, and I always like using this imagery. And again, it's not the greatest imagery, so bear with me. But again, I feel like it gets the point across, and as a result of that, until I feel like God gives me different type of imagery, then I'm going to stick with it. But the idea of positivity of, okay, I'm going to take a jar full of brownies. Now, I have nothing against brownies. I love brownies. I think they're great, okay? But the idea, if I had this container, and the container was transparent, I could see through it, see in it, see through it, and that container represented my body. And the brownies represented, negativity, whatever you wanted to call those negativity, and it's filled to the brim. All of a sudden, I recognize that, hey, I've been reading up, and I understand that broccoli is really, really good for the body. So that broccoli represents, a truth, a positive affirmation. So as a result of that, I start putting broccoli in the container, and then I start shoving it down into the container. And so now, as a result of that, I've got some broccoli in the container. Great, good, right? Except for what's still present? The brownies. Well, Brady, if you cram enough broccoli into the container, as a result of that, there's going to be nothing but just particle of brownies, but they're still particles. And how easily could it be, if it's still in me, that as a result of that, I could be triggered by that, and it could be fully functioning just like that. So if I don't recognize those brownies and get those brownies out to bring the broccoli in, then as a result of that, and again, all this can be based upon reality, choice, the dynamic of how Scripture is, the idea of understanding, recognizing, owning, expressing, and then inviting, right? And again, inviting the new truth in. So in all that, sorry if that illustration was terrible for you. I get it, okay? So the 10 axioms of choice theory is that the only person's behavior we control is our own. Absolutely. And again, if you can take that as a caveat and be able to apply it into everything you do, because a lot of times people, well, Brady, they're doing this, and it's making me they're making me feel. Oh, interesting. They're making you feel. Well, Brady, you know what I mean? Well, I want to make sure I'm on the same page. So can you make sure that what you're saying I understand, so I can know that I know I'm on the same page? But the idea of helping them understand that, guess what? The only behavior that they can control is their own. We can only give another person as information. Absolutely. And that is cue for us. The idea of, if they leave and they walk out of there and they go do whatever it is, and they come back next time and they didn't adhere to that, do we get irritated? We get frustrated. Now, again, they get to choose. Long-lasting psychological problems are relational problems. Okay. The idea of, if we look at the past, now again, they don't really put a lot of emphasis on the past, but the here and now and the present and those type of things like that. But again, if there is woundedness that happened in those early formative years and or yesterday, as a result of that, we could see how a lot of the impact of doing life with people actually bring in problems. And what we see is, with the inner child phenomenon, how people sit down on the inside. We can see, as a result of people growing chronologically, that little person is still sitting on the inside. And every time that little person gets triggered, we see that little person express themselves in such a way that we may look at a 40-year-old and be like, wow, they are acting like a little 3-year-old. Interesting. Okay. The problem relationship is always a part of our present life. What happened in the past has everything to do with who we are today. So it has a lot to do with the formation, making up who we are. But we can only satisfy our basic need right now and plan to continue to satisfy them in the future. So it's very life coaching oriented, that dynamic of understanding the past, but not really giving too much emphasis to it or really looking at it, but the idea of the here and now moving forward in the present. It's very life coaching oriented. We all satisfy our needs only by satisfying the pictures of our quality world. All we do is behave. Well, depending upon how you look at that will determine really what you believe in that. All behavior is total behavior and is made up of our four components: acting, thinking, feeling, and physiology. We'll talk a little bit more about those here in a little bit. All behavior is chosen, but we have a direct control over only over the acting and thinking components. We can control our feeling and physiology only indirectly through how we choose to act and think. So, talks about the different verbs and named by the part that they are most recognized. Goes into the 7 caring habits, the idea of the relationship with the client by describing them as supporting, encouraging, listening, accepting, trusting, respecting, and negotiating differences, which again, I think that these are different dynamics that I think you would be able to assimilate into any theoretical approach and be impacting, right? Supporting, yes. Encouraging, most certainly. Listening, yes. Accepting, trusting, accepting, yep, absolutely. Then he correlates that with the 7 deadly habits as harsh confrontation that should be avoided by reality therapists include criticizing, blaming, complaining, nagging, threatening, punishing, and rewarding to control. Wow. Let's just say that I would have a very hard conversation in love if I had a counselor underneath me practicing some of these parameters. The idea of criticizing. What's the purpose? Blaming. What's the point? Complaining, nagging, threatening, punishing, rewarding to control. How does any of that benefit the individual from awareness to willingness to engage? And in that, do we see Christ in any of those expressions? And so if we don't, then for us being people of belief, why would we even want to give attention to those things? So hopefully we can see, and as a result of that, I really like the terminology, how they're deadly habits, because I can see how that they would be creating death in the process when somebody is coming in with pain, not to get pulled back, but hopefully recognize opportunities to be able to move forward. The reality therapists, however, also do not accept excuses from clients. They do not criticize or argue, but they're caring for them, and they do not allow them to give up easy. Absolutely. The idea of, so what are you going to do next? Well, Brady, this is what happened, and it's so hard. Yeah, I can see how that'd be hard. Wow. So what are you feeling right now? Okay. What are you thinking? And walking them through the process of, like I've kind of shared y'all with my perspective, right? And then from that, when we get to the place, the next question is, so what are you going to do? Brady, I don't even know what to do. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And you want to know something? We don't have to have that answer right here and right now. But here's the one thing. We got to make sure that we don't stay in that place. Even though we don't know in this moment, we really don't need to stay in that place of not knowing. Okay? So we want to eventually get to the place of knowing what would that step look like. What we plan on doing. Okay? They utilize this parameter, this acronym of, or not acronym, but really the WDEP system, which stands for wants, direction and doing, self-evaluation, and planning. He asked this question, what do you want, is a question that I utilize all the time, right? The kind of the 5 invisibles that I was talking about. What do you want? What do you desire? And this is the biggest question Yeah, one or two, probably number one. If I was guessing, again, I don't have any metrics to go with it, that I get more issues, more pushbacks than anything else. For them, it really has a lot to do with their basic needs. I have a mentor who teaches and helps people very universally. Now, a believer, but teaches very universally because he has a lot of individuals who are non-believers that actually come to his practice. And I had the opportunity of walking through a training earlier in this year, and it was great. But he wrote a book called Beyond Willpower, and it's very eclectic in approach. But he has this approach where he tells the individual, hey, here is a magic genie lamp, okay? And now in this magic genie lamp, you get one wish, but here's a couple things that you have to understand about this lamp. You can't ask for another wish, and you can't violate anybody's will. And he was doing a training one time where he had this individual, and he said, so what would you wish for? And she said, $1 million. You can kind of tell the age of this because these days, I mean, $1 million would be great, don't get me wrong, but we could see, $1 million back in the day. That's where everybody kind of inspired to be. Now is $1 million lasts long. Okay, getting to the point. Okay, $1 million, wow, that's amazing. So what would you do with that $1 million? Okay, question one, number one, what would you do? Question number two, what would you do with it? What would you want? What would you do with it? I'd pay off all my bills. Wow, that's amazing. He said, you'd ask for $1 million, you'd pay off all your bills. Amazing. So what would that give you? Question number three, peace. Of course, there's probably thousands of people in this conference, and he leans over to her and he says, wow, I didn't realize peace cost $1 million. He says this lady broke and started crying because she had been after this very thing and trying to get $1 million to seek after what? This internal resolve that we all can have, understanding the peace of God. So for him, he had a very eclectic approach, getting to the very dynamic of what do we want and how it coordinates to the very needs of mankind, right? For this individual, she needed peace. Well, don't we all? Okay. D being the idea of direction and doing. What are you doing? What do you see you're doing what do you see yourself at this time doing and in the future? I like to utilize this in correlation with empty chair. Hey, if yourself 20 years from now was sitting across from you, what do you think that individual 20 years from now would be telling you so that you could know about what you're going through now? Yeah, I don't think I worded that very well. What would yourself 20 years from now want you to know about yourself now for then? What would you want to tell yourself 20 years ago? If yourself 20 years ago is sitting across from that, what do you wish you could have told yourself 20 years ago? What do you wish yourself 20 years from now could tell you that they wish that you knew about today? And so how you can assimilate these different therapeutic techniques into getting really, in essence, what we want, which is awareness. Okay. E, which is self-evaluation. Does your present behavior enable you to get what you want now? Well, Brady, I keep doing this, and I've been doing this, and I've been doing this, and I've been doing this. Okay, great. Wow, that shows your passion, your devotion, your tenacity. You always like to validate. Always validate, validate. When you validate some more. And then as a result of the move forward. Okay, wow. Sounds to me like you've got your persistency, your tenacity is wow. But do you feel like what you're going after and what you're doing is getting you closer to what you want? No. Okay. So if we continue to do it, do you feel like we'll still be here this time next year? They may get quiet. They may say no. They may say yes. Do we need to change something up? If we've been doing it this long and we don't feel like there's been any breakthrough, then my concern is that if we continue doing it this way, will we ever see the breakthrough that you're wanting? Okay. Last is P, which stands for planning. Planning and action. The idea of what are our next steps. There was one individual in there, and there might have been a couple that actually utilized kind of a plan and next steps for your mock counseling sessions. I thought that was amazing. Okay. I told y'all last time that I was going to try to keep these things fairly short because I know that y'all got so many other things going on throughout the week. So I'm going to run through the therapeutic techniques and interventions fairly quickly. Okay, so structuring, helping the client set up their expectations for therapy is necessary and needed. They're going to come in thinking, I've been a part of this before. Great. Well, they've been a part of the process of counseling, but have they been a part of your process? Okay, so the idea of intake, hey, do you have any questions, thoughts, comments, anything like that? Okay, no. That's why I always like to start a lot of my sessions, the idea, hey, do you have any questions about any of the intake, anything like that you may have read, that you did read that you wanted just to unpack a little bit, making sure, okay, if the answer is no, okay, well, here's how I like to work, and I always like to give a 2 to 5 minute just kind of foundation. Hey, any questions about any of that? No? Okay, great, now we can move forward. Confrontation. The client excuses are not accepted by a reality therapist. The idea, the understanding. Well, I tried, and we see Jesus with a man at the pool of Bethesda, right? The idea, do you want to be well? Or I can't remember exactly the question, the question Jesus asked. So please forgive me, but it was one from the standpoint of getting the man to not have excuses, to own where he is. Well, but by the time I try to get down there, people beat me too. Jesus was there. The healing actually came to this man. And as a result of that, the man kept trying to defer and create excuse, but Jesus wouldn't allow him. And as a result of that, something amazing happened as a result of healing coming to him and the man actually owning, right? Fantastic. Contracts, written agreements, the client has freely committed him or herself to do. Okay, so if I plan on being in session twice a month, okay, so if they miss, then, it would be the idea of holding them accountable. With sensitivity, with grace, of course, but the dynamic of, hey, we talked about the idea of us being, in session, us working together so that we can move towards these goals twice a month. But last month we only came once. So, there's sickness in the family or whatever that may be. Okay, yeah, I completely understand. So what do we need to do so that if that does happen this time, we can create an addendum so that you and I are on the same page. And as a result of that, if there is still sickness in your house, you can still get here twice or whatever that looks like. Instruction, teaching or coaching role, instructing the client in a specific skill so they can execute their plans and meet their needs and goal in a responsible way. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. Skillful questioning, the idea, does your present behavior empower you to get what you want now? Great question, something that we could all utilize, all be beneficial. The idea of what you're doing, is it creating an impact? We may look at it and say, boy, that's ridiculous. They don't need to keep doing that. But again, it's about empowering them to choose that freedom dynamic. And again, I love doing that regardless. Even when I see someone coming in, oh, Brady, we're doing all these different things. Okay, great. So as a result of that, how are they working? And my first thought was they probably aren't working very well, because if they were, they wouldn't be sitting here right now. But again, I don't want to communicate that because I want to move forward with sensitivity and acceptance and meeting them where they are. Okay, so how do you feel like that's been working? Well, it's okay, great. So what I hear is that in some areas that y'all it's created positive impact, but it hasn't gotten you exactly what it is that you want. So hopefully through this process, we can get you what you're missing from this so that we can actually move forward. Okay, emphasizing choice. Again, the idea of freedom for the client and choosing his or her own personal values. The idea about me not wanting to indoctrinate in this class, me not wanting to indoctrinate into them. Why? Because it's not my life, it's theirs. Just as it's not your life, it's theirs. And so the idea of trying to push something off on them, does that create help or does that create harm? Okay, role playing. This is a great one. The idea of when marriages, when an individual is needing to have a hard conversation. I utilize this all the time, the dynamic of utilizing empty chair with a role playing. Okay, so imagine your wife, imagine your husband, imagine your boss sitting in a chair in front of you. What is it that you need to tell them? Okay, remember the points of communication are why. Why do we feel like we need to communicate this? What is it that we're hoping to communicate? Our why, what's driving that? Or what is the actual verbiage? How? What is the manner? What are the what are the idiosyncrasies? Are we going to do it with anger, with gusto? What does that look like? But utilizing role play, and again, that's pretty self-explanatory. Support, accepting personal responsibility, and support from the reality therapist to be able to give them that absolutely constructive debate. The reality therapist challenges the client's ideas and values and vice versa. How? With sensitivity and acceptance. The idea, boy, that's wrong and you're ridiculous, and getting into those deep debates that are going to do what? Because again, it's about them and their life. And so in that, I always like to ask questions. Boy, that's really interesting. So if that is accurate based upon the way you see it, I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So can I talk just for a little bit? And I'm asking a question, but I'm not really even sure maybe. Okay, so here it goes. So by you saying this, then as a result of that has to mean that. Boy, I have to think about that one. Well, but what about this? And so in that, again, it's not about if we can have a constructive debate, but how. Humor, like we talked about earlier, the idea of humor is necessary and needed. Self-disclosure, the idea of sharing their own feelings, struggles, and weaknesses. I like to utilize self-disclosure, the idea of feelings, because again, the dynamic of how an individual can take that, and now as a result of that, they're playing the therapeutic role of trying to comfort and things like that. It's more of the dynamic of, boy, hey, early on, I can't believe I found myself in counseling, Brady. I always thought counseling was weak. You know what? I actually, years ago, thought the same thing. Then my wife and I, we went through about a 2-year process where we met with this amazing woman who allowed me to be able to see areas that I hadn't. And as a result, that I was so grateful because I was able to acknowledge God in some ways that I didn't even know that I needed to. And so I was grateful. But boy, I could understand that because I was in the same place. I like to utilize that from a premise of self-disclosure, not the idea of talking about my own feelings. Wow, boy, that really makes me sad too, right? Again, if you get overwhelmed and you feel like crying or whatever that may be, it's not the idea of trying to tell yourself, pull that tear back in. Of course not. Be yourself. Be yourself. But understand how this looks. He calls it positive addictions. Jogging, meditating, visiting with friends. I'm not really sure the dynamic of course, positivity, but I would call them a tool, not an addiction. So again, assessments. They don't use formal testing or diagnosis of clients, but the idea of and I used to do this a lot of time, okay, especially individuals. I see a lot of people with anxiety. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest, where would you kind of assess the anxiety of being at today? Why? Because it allows me to see, is the anxiety continuing to progress? Is it regressing or is it staying stagnant? And so I understand kind of what we're doing. Are we moving closer to the finish line or are we getting further from it? Metaphors, right? Symbolic language, deeper connection, paradoxical techniques, referring to the provision of contradiction instructions to the clients in order to help them overcome resistance and move in the direction of further therapeutic change. Okay, so the dynamic of that, and I'll let you read a little bit more about that. Really don't utilize that a whole lot, but maybe you do. Maybe you will and can. So in this, for the sake of time, reality therapy, what do you think? And not only that, but within your mock counseling sessions, is this something that you would feel moved to employ to see? Is it something that works with who you are and the goals that you have for this field and what you feel like God's calling for you? But I feel like that there's a lot of different complexities that can fit the parameter of Christianity, and then there are some areas that really kind of fall in some questioning, and then others that it's kind of like, ew, do you feel like they are? Because again, it's not about what I think. It's about what you think and how you feel about not only behavior therapy, reality therapy, there we go, and not only that, but all the other ones, and how you plan on utilizing them in a way that's going to be able to impact the people that are sitting across from you so that they can acknowledge and engage their will, invite God in to do the very thing that only He can do, so that they can take a step and actually continue to take steps so that healing and resolve can be had. Week 5, here we go. It's going to be a great week. Hope you have a great week. If you need anything, please feel free to reach out, and look forward to getting to read your mock counseling sessions and your discussion boards. Have a great week. Bye-bye.